At its height, the Roman Empire spanned 3 continents and governed 20% of the world's population, creating a footprint that would endure for centuries. But 8 centuries before Rome achieved this global scale, the civilization began as a gritty family dispute over a minor kingdom in central Italy. In the city of Alba, a paranoid man named Romulus seized the throne by violently deposing his brother, the rightful king Numitor. Romulus secured his position by forcing his niece, Numitor's daughter, into the service of the goddess Vesta. As a Vestal virgin, she was bound by a religious mandate of chastity, which legally guaranteed she could never produce a rival heir to challenge the king's stolen crown. When the guards discovered her pregnant a short time later, she faced immediate execution. She defiantly claimed her pregnancy was a divine intervention, asserting that the father of her twin boys was Mars, the god of war. Romulus ignored the claim of divine parentage and ordered the infants destroyed. The foundational story of the world's greatest empire starts here, not with a grand vision, but as a panicked reaction to an illegitimate threat to a tyrant's power. The king's servants were tasked with drowning the twins, Romulus and Remus, in the Tiber River. However, the river was severely flooded, and the violent currents kept the men from reaching the main channel. Fearing the deep water, the men dropped the wooden trough holding the babies near the flooded bank. As the water receded, the trough drifted until it washed ashore on a smooth patch of mud. According to the legend, a wild she-wolf found the infants and allowed them to nurse, while a woodpecker brought them morsels of food. These creatures were both sacred to Mars, lending weight to their mother's claim of divine lineage. The reality of their survival was more practical. A royal swineherd named Faustulus discovered the boys while tending his pigs. He took them home and raised the exiled princes in secret alongside his own family. Romulus and Remus grew up as rugged outcasts. Their physical strength and fierce aggression eventually set them apart, and they became the natural leaders of a growing band of runaway slaves and local herdsmen. This story of divine protection and wilderness survival transformed a band of violent fugitives into a group with a perceived holy mission. It provided the outcasts with the political authority they needed to justify seizing power by force. Once the twins learned their true lineage, they rallied their followers and marched on Alba. They assassinated King Romulus in his house and restored their grandfather, Numitor, to the throne. Despite their victory, the brothers refused to live as subjects in Alba. They led their band of outcasts back to the wilderness of their youth to found an independent city where they could rule as kings. The project immediately fractured over a dispute about the city's location. Romulus favored the Palatine Hill, while Remus chose the Aventine. To settle the matter, they turned to augury, reading the will of the gods through the flight of vultures. This timeline tracks the split second that broke the brothers' alliance. Remus recorded the first sighting with 6 vultures, but moments later, Romulus reported double that number, claiming his larger tally overrode his brother's speed. Both brothers claimed victory, and the disagreement devolved into a massive brawl between their supporters. In the chaos, as Remus mockingly leaped over a ditch meant for the city walls, Romulus, or one of his followers, struck Remus dead. Romulus proceeded to build his walls alone. The very borders of Rome were drawn in a brother's blood, establishing a ruthless ambition that would define the Roman character for centuries. To populate his new city, Romulus declared Rome an asylum. He offered total sanctuary to any runaway slave, debtor, or murderer who could reach the city, creating a population composed entirely of desperate, violent men. While this gave Rome a formidable army, it created an existential crisis. Neighboring tribes refused to marry their daughters to a city of criminals, meaning the Roman population had no way to produce a second generation. Romulus devised a trap. He announced a religious festival and invited the neighboring Sabine tribe to attend. Thinking it was a gesture of friendship, the Sabines arrived unarmed with their wives and daughters. At a signal from Romulus, the Roman men drew their swords and charged the crowd. They forcibly abducted the unmarried Sabine women, driving the Sabine men out of the city in a violent breach of hospitality. The Sabines eventually launched a retaliatory war that pushed the Romans to the brink of defeat. The two armies met for a final, decisive battle in the valley between the Palatine and Capitoline hills. At the height of the fighting, the abducted Sabine women, who were now wives and mothers in Rome, sprinted onto the battlefield. They threw themselves between the two armies, begging their Sabine fathers and Roman husbands to stop the slaughter. Romulus turned the peace treaty into a total political merger. He invited the entire Sabine tribe to move into the city, doubling Rome's population and absorbing his former enemies as equal citizens and senators. After decades of rule, Rome had become a regional power. However, the same absolute authority that allowed Romulus to forge the state eventually corrupted his leadership. Romulus began to govern with total arrogance, adopting royal scarlet robes and surrounding himself with guards who carried whips and leather thongs. He stripped the Senate of its power, using the assembly only to announce his commands. His reign ended during a public assembly at the Goat's Marsh. A sudden solar eclipse plunged the city into darkness, followed by a violent storm that caused the crowd to scatter in terror. When the storm passed, Romulus was gone. While his supporters claimed the gods had taken him, many suspected the marginalized senators had used the darkness to assassinate the king and smuggle his remains away under their cloaks. To pacify the angry public, a noble named Julius Proculus claimed he saw Romulus on the road, dressed in shining armor. He testified that Romulus had ascended to heaven and commanded the city to worship him as the god Quirinus. Whether he was murdered or deified, Romulus succeeded because he combined the ruthless violence of a raider with the brilliant, inclusive statecraft needed to forge an empire.